As a conservatory graduate with enough skill to seriously pursue a career as a pianist, I often found myself frustrated by the comparisons made between myself and less skilled amateurs who merely played chess for fun. This irritation was compounded when observing the dynamic between my oldest son and his wife. Despite my son's musical talent, his wife often looked down on him, considering herself superior due to her background in music education. Even when his own playing was being mocked, my son chose not to respond, exhibiting a lack of confidence that left him submissive to her demands. It pained me to see my son belittled and dominated mentally, and I couldn't help but wonder why he remained in such a toxic relationship. Despite being a kind and attractive man, he seemed resigned to endure her demeaning behavior. These thoughts weighed heavily on my mind as my husband and I coincidentally encountered my son and his wife at a jazz bar. With the scheduled pianist running late, we volunteered to fill in, unaware of the twist fate had in store. I'm Melissa, 72 years old, happily living with my husband James. With our eldest son Thomas married and my husband retired, we relish the freedom to indulge in life's simple pleasures. One such joy is our shared love for music, often enjoying impromptu jazz sessions together. However, our contentment was marred by our strained relationship with Thomas's wife Amanda. From the moment we met her, there was an underlying tension, exacerbated by her disrespectful remarks towards Thomas's musical abilities. Amanda's disparaging comments during our first meeting shocked me. Her criticism of Thomas's piano skills, despite his dedication and passion, left me speechless. While my son's heart had been broken by past failures, Amanda's callous remarks only served to deepen his wounds. Despite Thomas's attempts to downplay the situation, his discomfort was palpable. It was heartbreaking to witness my son's confidence shattered by his own wife's cruelty. As the evening unfolded, tensions reached a boiling point when my husband finally confronted Amanda's disrespect. Despite his anger, she remained unfazed, further cementing my concerns about her character. In that moment, I couldn't help but question how someone could be so blatantly rude, especially when meeting their future in-laws for the first time. I didn't feel any love toward my son. Thomas, are you sure you want to marry her? I asked, hoping he would reconsider. Yeah, the only woman who'd want to marry a guy like me is Amanda, he replied with a tone of resignation. That's not true, I insisted, but he remained adamant. His voice carried a hint of pain, a stark contrast to his usual humility. Despite my objections, Thomas went ahead with the marriage, but since then, he seemed trapped under his wife's control. She shunned household chores, claiming they'd harm her hands, leaving everything for Thomas to handle. He sounded miserable whenever he called, but he refused to entertain any notion of separation. I couldn't comprehend his reasoning until one day, while shopping for my husband's birthday gift, we stumbled upon Amanda in the mall, arm in arm with another man. Is that Amanda? Thomas muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. As we confronted her, she showed no remorse, brazenly admitting to her affair. My son's face drained of color as he struggled to process the betrayal. In the midst of the confrontation, Amanda turned her attention to Thomas, belittling him with callous remarks and attempting to manipulate him into staying with her. But despite her attempts to control him, I urged Thomas to break free from her grasp. It pained me to see him subjected to such cruelty. In the end, as Amanda tried to convince him of his dependence on her, I pleaded with him to see his own worth and to not succumb to her manipulations. Thomas, you should break up with her, I implored, my heart heavy with concern. Sorry, Mom, he replied, his voice tinged with resignation. I will break up. Why? I asked, perplexed. You wouldn't understand. You're good at everything. You're a great cook and even on the piano. No matter how much I practice, I could never surpass you, Thomas confessed, his voice heavy with defeat as he hunched his back and looked down. It hit me then, the weight of my unintentional pressure on him. I'm not particularly good at cooking, although it is true that I've been hiding the fact that I was once a professional pianist. I'm not such a great person, and yet my son was comparing himself to me and losing his confidence. Thomas continued, your mother didn't even care that you were hurting. I'm the only one on your side. Shall we go home? Wait, Thomas, let's talk this out, I urged, but he turned away, led by his wife's hand. I stood there, helpless, realizing the extent of the damage. When I shared the story with my husband, his face flushed with anger. What are you talking about? It isn't your fault. It's all because of that wife. But I didn't know our son was hurting. If I had cared more about him sooner, He wouldn't have lost his confidence. That's on me too, I lamented, tears streaming down my cheeks. Melissa, we have to talk to Thomas about this. It's not about who's at fault, my husband insisted, trying to console me, but the guilt lingered. Days passed, and my worry for my son only grew. Then, unexpectedly, my husband returned home with news. Guess what? The pianist Mr. Johnson is coming to a local jazz bar. Mr. Johnson, the professional pianist, I exclaimed, excitement flooding my veins. Let's go together. It might be a nice change of pace. With eagerness, we made our reservation. However, on the day of the event, a typhoon struck, halting transportation. Determined, we trudged through the rain, arriving at the venue to find a resilient crowd eagerly awaiting Mr. Johnson's performance, despite the adverse weather. As I scanned the bar, I caught sight of my eldest son and his wife. Hey Mom, you're here too, my son greeted, his gaze shifting away as I approached, taken aback by the unexpected encounter. Oh, you guys are here too, I replied, attempting to diffuse any tension. We like Mr. Johnson's music. I wonder if those who just play as a hobby can truly understand the charm of Mr. Johnson. I had the privilege of being taught by him as a guest instructor during my conservatory days, my daughter-in-law boasted, much to my annoyance. Despite my irritation, I chose to remain composed, unwilling to start a confrontation just as the performance was about to begin. As the anticipation for Mr. Johnson's arrival grew, the bar began to buzz with excitement. However, the staff appeared flustered, and the owner took to the stage, offering an apology. I'm terribly sorry, but due to the typhoon, Mr. Johnson's arrival has been delayed. It will take at least an hour and a half until he arrives. I must ask you to wait. No way. We came all the way here in this terrible weather, and what are we supposed to do in the meantime? The audience erupted in discontent. It's such a disappointment. Even if we ate, we'd be done by the time he arrived. My daughter-in-law chimed in with her usual rudeness. Frustrated murmurs spread through the crowd, with some patrons preparing to leave despite the rare opportunity to hear a live performance. Unable to sit idly by, I turned to my husband with a proposal. Why don't we perform? I suggested. We could be a placeholder until Mr. Johnson arrives. What do you think? What are you saying? People came here to listen to a professional performance. They're going to heckle your amateur piano playing, my daughter-in-law scoffed, but I paid her no mind, focusing on my husband's response. Understanding my determination, he nodded in agreement. Sounds like a plan. Let me talk to the owner. After a brief conversation with the owner, we climbed onto the stage, heartbeats racing as we prepared to perform. Luckily, the jazz bar had a drum set, and with our nerves somewhat calmed, we exchanged a glance and began to play. As the first notes filled the room, the once noisy audience fell silent, captivated by our impromptu performance. Before we knew it, even those who had been preparing to leave had taken their seats, drawn in by the music. Both my husband and I felt invigorated by the energy of the crowd, improvising and engaging with the audience, eliciting laughter and applause. In that moment, as I locked eyes with Thomas, I could see the surprise and enjoyment in his expression, bridging the gap between us with the universal language of music. I approached Thomas and gently took his hand. Mom, what are you doing? Let's play together, he protested, but I insisted. Music is about having fun. We settled on playing When You Wish Upon a Star, a song we used to play together when Thomas was in elementary school. My husband waited patiently, ready to keep the rhythm on the drums. It's okay, leave it to me, I reassured Thomas. With hesitant hands, he placed his fingers on the keyboard as instructed, and soon, he began to play. It was clear that he remembered the piece from all the practice he had put in back in the day. His smooth movements brought a smile to my face, and cheers and applause erupted from the audience. Encouraged by their response, Thomas's face lit up, and he joyfully continued to play. It was as if he had returned to his childhood days. Before we knew it, an hour and a half had passed. As we finished playing, we were greeted with a loud round of applause. Standing there was Mr. Johnson, the pianist himself. Bravo! That was fantastic, he exclaimed, prompting us to bow. But before we could leave the stage, he stopped us. Are you guys a family? He asked. When we confirmed, he remarked, no wonder it was such a harmonious performance. Don't you all agree? The audience erupted into applause once more. However, my daughter-in-law, not finding the situation amusing, stormed onto the stage and approached Mr. Johnson. Do you remember me? I was once your piano student, she claimed, but Mr. Johnson apologized. Unable to recall. Undeterred, she insisted on performing, boasting about her aspirations to be a professional pianist. With a malicious grin directed at me, she began to play, expecting praise. However, Mr. Johnson's response was unexpected. After listening quietly, he remarked that her performance was pretty ordinary and lacked charm. In a fit of embarrassment and anger, my daughter-in-law challenged him, only to be met with a blunt critique of her lack of taste and musicality. As she glared at me, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Mr. Johnson then approached our table, intrigued by our musical backgrounds. When he learned my name, recognition rippled through the audience, and he grabbed my hand, his eyes shining with curiosity. "I'm a fan of yours, Melissa," Mr. Johnson exclaimed, surprising me. "Me? Really?" I replied, taken aback. "Yes, I started learning the piano after listening to your performances. I've always wanted to perform together someday, but you retired. I never imagined we would meet like this," he shared joyfully, much to the surprise of my daughter-in-law, who hurriedly approached. "Wait, what's this about being a former pianist?" she interjected. "Didn't you know Melissa is a famous pianist who has won prizes at international competitions? She has performed extensively abroad, and her concerts in the US were always sold out." I didn't know that, Mom. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with dejection, causing my husband and me to lower our heads apologetically. "We're sorry for keeping it a secret. The truth is, I stopped being a pianist when I became pregnant with you. I decided that I couldn't continue my career because my greatest desire was to have you, and I never regret this decision. The days I've spent with you are my most precious treasures," I explained, tears welling in my eyes. Thomas began to sob. "I've always loved listening to you play the piano because you play with so much joy. I'm glad we could play the piano together today," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Your son's performance was excellent. His joy was truly infectious, really," Mr. Johnson praised, but Thomas blushed at the compliment. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law glared at us, her face twisted in anger. "How dare you embarrass me like this, keeping your career as a pianist a secret?" I didn't mean to," I started to explain, but Mr. Johnson stepped in between us. "If anyone is causing embarrassment, it's you. You've been bragging about being the better pianist since the beginning. This isn't a competition. If you want to show off your skills, why don't you join a contest? Don't ruin the atmosphere of this enjoyable jazz bar," he scolded. Upon hearing Mr. Johnson's words, the other customers voiced their agreement, and my daughter-in-law stormed out of the bar in a fit of rage. After that, Mr. Johnson's performance began, and we enjoyed the delicious food and music. As we headed home that day, I walked with my husband and son. "Thomas, I love the way you play the piano. You don't have to be the best in a competition. I love the joy you express when you play. Not just that, there are so many other things about you that I love," I reassured him. "That's right, like your ability to work hard and persevere. You should be more proud of that," my husband chimed in. Although we didn't talk much after that, my son called a few days later to tell us that he was getting a divorce. This news was music to our ears. "I'm done wasting my life on that woman," he declared, seeming to have regained his spirit, which relieved us. We later heard that his ex-wife was struggling with debts and personal troubles, while my son gained confidence and even had plans to go to a concert with a woman who also loves music. I was so happy to see my son's transformation, and the best part was that we started performing together occasionally. I truly wish for my son's happiness.